On July 30th, 2003, a team of Spanish and French scientists did the impossible. On that day, a creature was born, the only member of a species that had been extinct for over 3 years. The Pyrenean ibex, a large wild goat once common in the Pyrenees, had been hunted to extinction over the course of several centuries, and the last of its kind died in 2000, killed by a falling tree. But Celia, the endling of her species, would live on in the form of her cells, which were preserved in numerous laboratories. After years of research, scientists successfully removed the DNA from the eggs of a domestic goat, and the nuclei from Celia's preserved cells were injected directly into them. Of 57 implantations, only 7 resulted in pregnancies, and of those, only 1 resulted in a birth. And on that day in 2003, a genetically pure clone of Celia was brought into the world. Sadly though, the newborn didn't live for long. She died within moments, unable to breathe due to a severe lung deformity. This event, though monumental for science, brings to light a harsh reality. In the natural world, there are no guarantees. For any species, survival is a matter of luck and adaptability. When environmental changes happen too quickly, or when luck runs out, the sad truth is that these species become distant memories, relics of a past pushed from the world, either by their own inability to move forward or by the actions of a stronger, more dangerous species. When every last member of a species has completely disappeared from the earth, leaving behind little more than suggestions that they ever existed in the first place, the rest of the world attempts to adapt and generally moves on. But in the modern era, a new question began to emerge. Is all hope lost? Is death the finality we always assumed it was? The answer to that question has been a resounding yes, until recently. New scientific advancements are beginning to change how we view our role in the process of extinction and its effects on the natural order of the world. Today, dear traveler, we'll begin a journey into these questions and many more as we observe just a few long-gone creatures who may yet see the light again. The term extinction comes from the word extinguish, or to put out. Though the methods of determining extinction are by no means comprehensive or even universally accepted, in short, a species is considered extinct when there are believed to be no remaining living members in the world. It is estimated that upwards of 99% of all species that have ever roamed the world are now extinct, buried in the layers of strata beneath its surface. Extinction happens for a variety of reasons. Biological maladaptation may cause a species to be driven from its environment. Mass natural disasters can cause the deaths of billions of creatures worldwide, such as the KT extinction event, which is theorized to have eliminated the dinosaurs, and the Permian-Triassic extinction events, which devastated the planet by eliminating 96% of known species. But today, the most common cause of extinction is humanity. Human beings encroaching on natural habitats, releasing toxic materials into the environment, and hunting for sport and pleasure have caused more extinctions in modern times than any natural process. In fact, at the current rate, experts estimate that humanity will have driven roughly 50% of all currently living species to their demise by the year 2100. This rampage of destruction has earned a name on par with the 5 previous mass extinction events, the Thylacine extinction. You see, we as a species are unique on Earth. As hunters, we are the only beings that consistently prey on the adults of other apex predators, an act that has cascading effects on food chains the world over. As a result, in the ecological sense, humanity has taken on a role unprecedented in all of Earth's history, global super predator. Of course, it's not all bad. There are many efforts dedicated to preserving life on Earth. But now, scientists around the world are suggesting that while preservation is a great thing, we may be able to take it a step further. As it turns out, an unprecedented extinction event just might lead to unprecedented solutions, and ways to very nearly reverse death itself. De-Extinction is a series of experimental processes aimed at revitalizing long-lost species through scientific measures. For most of us, this concept brings to mind Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park, in which a team of scientists were able to bring a variety of dinosaurs back to life and display them in a living museum of sorts, the most dangerous safari park to ever exist. Fortunately for us, the events of Jurassic Park were pure fiction. And back in 1990, the year Jurassic Park was published, De-Extinction as a whole was close to fiction as well. But in more modern times, there has been significant research, progress, and even moderate success in similar projects, though blessedly we are still quite a long way from T-Rexes reclaiming the planet. Some of these methods have become so successful, or are so close to success, that a new term has been coined: resurrection biology. But how exactly do these methods work? Are we extracting DNA from mosquitoes trapped in fossilized amber? Well, not quite. De-extinction as a new field of scientific study can be broken into 3 overarching categories based on the methodology being used to revitalize a species. The first de-extinction method is called backbreeding. This involves the selection of traits known to have been possessed by extinct species from among their living relatives and breeding for it over a number of generations. It's roughly the same process of selective breeding that has given us designer dogs and high-yield food crops, and it's a process humanity has been perfecting for millennia. Take, for example, the case of the quagga, a South African subspecies of zebra that was hunted to extinction in the late 1800s. Quaggas were smaller than standard zebras, with stripes only covering their head and sometimes backs, the rest of their bodies a light tan. In 1987, a German natural historian named Reinhold Rau initiated the Quagga Project, a scientific experiment aimed at breeding a new line of quagga from modern zebras. This new species would be dubbed the Rau quagga in his honor. The project has since gone through 4 generations of breeding and has largely succeeded in its efforts, with several Rau quagga now roaming a reserve in South Africa. But the quagga isn't the only animal targeted for backbreeding. Another famous effort seeks to establish a line of cattle similar to the aurochs, a large, hardy ancestor of modern cattle that died out in the early 17th century. In the 1920s, 2 brothers by the names of Heinz and Lutz Heck attempted to breed an aurochs look-alike, using Central and Southern European cattle as the basis of their efforts. The resulting species, called Heck cattle, is indeed similar, but differs in many ways, most notably in size, as the Heck cattle are smaller and don't reliably exhibit the large horns so characteristic of their ancestors. Not only that, but there are numerous species that already more closely resemble the aurochs. Using species such as the Chianina and the Sayaguesa, as well as the Spanish fighting bull, more recent efforts have resulted in Taurus cattle, which are much closer in size and horn length to their long-extinct forebears. But of course, the main consideration with backbreeding is that while selective breeding can give us species superficially similar to those that have gone extinct, the gene pool can never be exactly the same. Indeed, this method brings back only a facsimile of the original species. The original genetic markers are likely forever lost to history. Then there is the sad reality that backbreeding simply isn't possible for many older extinct species. Without knowing exactly what these animals look like, or without very similar living species, researchers would have a difficult time selecting for any specific traits. It's a process that works largely with recent extinctions, and even then, it faces the uncertainty of selective breeding in general. There is no way to guarantee a desirable trait will appear regularly in the offspring. But the process of bypassing death itself isn't easy, and the journey to resurrection has many paths. Rebuilding an extinct population is difficult, to say the least, but as any author, dungeon master, or Spec Evo project builder will tell you, world building can be just as difficult. Well, close anyway. But with World Anvil, even the most complex world building is a breeze. With its robust tools, you can write up detailed accounts for each of your species, races, and regions, and use the built-in auto-linker function to keep track of how they relate to or descend from one another. Or you can start by importing a detailed map and then link each of your species profiles to their geographic location, making it easy to visualize your creation from a planetary view. Plus, World Anvil is always adding new features. Recently, they added Chronicles, which takes some aspects of one of my favorite features, the Timeline Creation tool, and allows you to connect important events with their location on a map. You can even link articles such as your species profiles to these world events and their locations, which can take your creation from a dull sequence of events to a living, breathing, fully interconnected world. And once you've forged your fantasy, sci-fi, or Spec Evo world, all of your entries are completely searchable. Gone are the days of documents, scattered folders, and tattered notebooks. With World Anvil, the only thing holding you back is your own imagination. So if you want to try out World Anvil for yourself, just visit worldanvil.com and enter code ThoughtPotato at checkout for a whopping 40% off an annual plan. So whether you're a novelist, a dungeon master planning your next campaign, or you're looking to create an alien planet from scratch, if you've had an idea for a world-building project and just haven't figured out where to start, check out World Anvil today and get started. Links are in the description. The next and perhaps most accurate method of de-extinction currently being tested is cloning, or more specifically, somatic cell nuclear transfer. Though it sounds more like science fiction than science fact, cloning is actually a relatively viable revitalization process. It only requires that the DNA of an extinct species be extracted from a preserved cell, then injected into a nucleus-free egg from the species' closest living relative. The egg can then be transferred into a host animal for incubation. This was the exact process used to give life to Dolly the sheep, a famous experiment born in the 1990s from a cloned egg, which itself was made using genetic material from an adult sheep and implanted in a host. By all accounts, Dolly was a fairly standard sheep who lived a healthy, relatively long life, and whose birth sparked intense debate as to whether cloning would soon become viable for humans. But of course, Dolly's case was so successful because the host animals were of the exact same kind, living sheep. Can this process be used to bring back a species with no remaining individuals? Well, as we saw with the Pyrenean ibex, the answer is a resounding yes. The question of whether this process can produce a viable previously extinct organism is yet to be answered fully. But in our quest for answers, we can turn our attention to another species that went extinct relatively recently, the Tasmanian tiger. Also called the Thylacine, the Tasmanian tiger was, until recently, the only member of the family Thylacinidae left on planet Earth. It was driven to extinction in the early 20th century by hunting and destruction of its natural habitat. The last known thylacine, a male named Benjamin who'd been housed at the Beaumaris Zoo in Hobart, Australia, died of exposure in 1936, just 2 months after the species was granted status as protected in the region. In the years since the thylacine was classified as extinct, however, it should be noted that many people in its former habitats of Australia, Tasmania, and New Guinea have reported sightings. Unfortunately, though some of these reports seem to be credible, nothing has been confirmed. But recently, researchers did discover the largest strand of intact Tasmanian tiger DNA ever documented, extracted from a preserved 108-year-old juvenile specimen. Because this strand holds significant minimally degraded genetic material, and because the Tasmanian tiger has close relatives in the Dunarts and Numbats of the marsupial family still alive and thriving, the possibility of cloning a thylacine has moved tantalizingly close to reality. But while cloning may be a viable option, more recent advances in biotechnology could provide an even more effective option, and the concept of playing God has never been so concrete. In March of 2022, a group of researchers announced the formation of the Thylacine Integrated Genetic Restoration Research Lab, or TIGER for short. The goal of this project is to utilize technology that simply wasn't available in past decades, namely CRISPR, a genetic engineering technique that works so well it's been referred to as DNA cut and paste. This is a process by which geneticists take an existing animal's genetic blueprint and edit it by selectively incorporating genes which code for key traits in an extinct animal. This can lead to not only a more accurate revitalization of an extinct animal, but may also work for species who went extinct in the more distant past. Most likely, the Tiger Project will produce a creature that is extremely similar to the extinct thylacine, but will incorporate small amounts of a close relative's genome. The result may be 99.9% Tasmanian tiger and perhaps 0.1% Dunart. It may not be perfect, but it's a far more accurate approach than, say, backbreeding. Even still, some scientists estimate that a true breakthrough in the level of genome editing that would be required to bring back the thylacine may be a decade away. But the Tasmanian tiger isn't the only extinct species that CRISPR could, in a sense, resurrect from the dead. The same method is currently being tested on the famous woolly mammoth. Mammoths, originally natives of the Siberian tundra and the tundras of North America and Europe, went largely extinct roughly 10,000 years ago, with the last surviving group having died out in the 1600s BC. A few thousand years later, in September of 2021, scientists from the company Colossal announced that they were going to attempt to resurrect the mammoth by editing the genome of elephants, the mammoth's closest living relative. They are adding in genes to control for traits such as dense, dark hair and thick fat layers, among others, and hope to eventually produce a gene specimen that can be implanted into a live host. In doing so, they aim to not only satisfy scientific curiosity, but also improve the environmental stability of their original ecosystems. The Siberian tundra, for example, is much different now than it was during the age of the mammoths. Their grazing broke up the fields of moss that have currently taken over, and their droppings fertilized the earth. In an effort to reduce the carbon dioxide output of the modern tundra, ecologists have been introducing bison and other ungulates, hoping to restore it to the grassland it once was. In theory, a de-extinct species of mammoth could do this much more efficiently. Still, genome editing is a difficult method, and it's still in the earliest stages of development. It requires extensive knowledge of the extinct creature's adapted traits and physicality, and cannot currently account for animal temperament. Without a decent sample to go on, creating a viable genome from scratch is time-consuming and nearly impossible to accurately predict. As you may have noticed, all methods of de-extinction currently in development are focused largely on modern extinctions, ones that occurred within the last few hundred years. The main reason for this is the lack of concrete source material for older extinctions. Take the extinction of dinosaurs, now famous in the media. The dinosaurs of Crichton's Jurassic Park are large, aggressive, scaled beasts with thin frames. At the time of its writing, this was a fairly realistic interpretation of the species portrayed. In modern times, however, we've discovered that many species of dinosaurs weren't primarily scaly at all, and many were covered in feathers. There are also doubts as to what their fat structure would have looked like on top of their skeletons and musculature. The concept of shrink wrapping has long been controversial for this very reason. Because we're unclear about which traits exactly were present, we cannot backbreed our way to any particular dinosaur species. We also don't have enough viable DNA sampling to either attempt cloning or genetic synthesis. DNA, after all, begins to degrade as soon as the subject dies, so any samples we have now are nearly unreadable. Still, in a more realistic sense, all three of these de-extinction processes show promise of becoming real, viable solutions to the Holocene extinction crisis. Could they give us a way to repopulate the natural world with the species we've driven out of it? Well, that's the ultimate question, and it brings us to the massive debate so eloquently stated by Ian Malcolm. Do we risk becoming so preoccupied by whether or not we can that we don't stop to think about whether or not we should? A major concern about the entire de-extinction process is that of practicality. Will the species that we bring back actually fit into the world as we know it now? This is especially pertinent for species we drove to extinction by removing their habitats in the first place. With no home to return to, would bringing them back to the Earth simply be prolonging their inevitable death sentence? To illustrate this, let's return to the mammoth. While its reintroduction could facilitate a more stable tundra environment, the amount of free-roaming tundra landscape has decreased dramatically since the time of the Ice Age. If we were to bring back mammoths, how many would we bring back? What number would provide a stable population without proliferating so much that they begin to encroach on other animals' territory? And in that same vein, is there a point where we'd need to limit their population? Making these decisions, critics argue, is akin to playing God. It is beyond our ethical right. For this party of detractors, the resources spent on de-extinction would be better spent on rehabilitation of the environment and the protection of species that still roam the Earth. The other side of that argument is simple. If we are the reason that a species no longer exists, should it not be our responsibility to ensure that they are returned safely to their role in their respective ecosystems? If we can create for them habitable landscapes by reconstituting the natural world and reducing our impact on it, and if it's within our ability to do so, then many would argue that this is the path we should take. And as we've seen, the two arguments aren't always opposed to each other. If George Church, geneticist and founder of the Mammoth Resurrection Project Colossal, is to be believed, then the resources spent on de-extinction can also directly benefit the ecosystem they once occupied. But of course, the resources needed to resurrect any extinct animal are astronomical. The initial round of funding for the Mammoth Project alone required many millions of dollars, and that's just the beginning. There are many who argue that that money would be better spent on the conservation and revitalization of species that are barely clinging to life. Species like the vaquita, baiji, Amur leopard, and thousands more are perilously close to complete annihilation, and in the case of the baiji, this may already be the case. It's difficult to address the concerns inherent in the idea of de-extinction with any level of certainty. Any argument against it hinges on the idea of ecological autonomy, or nature's right to operate itself independently of human influence. There are those who believe that we have already meddled too much and that facilitating ecological autonomy should be our first priority. Then there are those who believe that we have done so much harm that only undoing that harm can restore true ecological autonomy. Which side is more correct? That's a question I leave to you, dear traveler. We may not know the true effects these efforts will bring, or whether in our lifetime we'll feel the footfalls of a giant mammoth shake the ground beneath us, or see a herd of quagga roam the African plains. But one thing's for sure, we don't need to worry about playing God. After all, when scientific advancements have come this far, it's clear that we're no longer playing. If you enjoyed this video, consider leaving a like below and check out this video for more. As always, thanks for watching, and remember, you matter.